I'm Tony Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. Hi, I'm Tony Williams, and welcome to Brooklyn Savvy. We are delighted to host Barbara Glickstein. Now, you are a public health nurse, a broadcast journalist. You have a show called Health Styles on WBAI. What is it, Thursdays at 11 p.m.?
That's right, 99.5 FM. Thanks
Excellent.
for the plug.
I wanted to get that in there, and we're going to be talking to you because you are a renowned expert on human trafficking. So we're going to be talking about human trafficking today, ladies. But before we dive into this topic, let me introduce our panel. We have Ellen Salpeter, Denise Arbisu, and
Hi.
Tracy Smith. Okay, so Barbara, help us understand what human trafficking is and its ramifications here in this country and abroad. That's pretty broad, right, people? Right. But anyway.
Yes. Big topic.
Yes.
It is. Well, thank you for inviting me on your show to talk to your followers about an issue that's really important to all of us, and certainly as a concerned Brooklyn resident, a Manhattan resident, someone who comes from Manhattan and is a global citizen of the world, aware of the fact that this is all over the world in every country, and really here also in our own country in the United States. So there's a formal definition that the United Nations and the U.S. government uses around human trafficking, which is about the acquisition of people by improper means, usually by deception or forced fraud, deception, and it's really about exploiting them, either for forced labor or the sex trade. We hear a lot about the sex trade, and we can talk about that for sure, but I want to point out that actually what we do know in terms of numbers is that there are more people globally, and those numbers are anywhere from 26 to 30 million people who are probably enforced in labor and not the sex trade. The other important thing to know, and sadly, is that more than half of those who are trafficked are women and children. Right. And mainly they are in sex trade, although not exclusively. There's the domestic situation where people are in people's homes, and certainly there's the farm workers and other factory workers who are enforced into servitude.
So what is fueling this? You know, is it greed? You know, what is this? What's driving this?
Well, I think greed certainly is. It's the third largest or second, depending on where you look at the data, of the most criminal activity in the world. And that follows or is with drugs, guns, and then, of course, human trafficking. Yes, greed and criminality. You know, there are myths around the issue of human trafficking, which I want to just put out there right away. One is that it's not just an international issue. It's actually happening here in our own backyards. It's not because of poverty. You know,
it's not because of poverty.
It's not
poverty was a huge
driver.
driver.
But poverty doesn't cause human trafficking. People who are
they're usually targeted.
Exactly, and it's also very much a racially targeted issue. Most of the people who are trafficked are people of color. Right. Although we
they're being preyed on by traffickers.
I think that's a good way to describe it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I also understood when we spoke about it that people are offered a chance at a better life.
That's
I mean, there's
right.
deception that goes into, for people who want a better life or want more economic opportunity, and then they are lured into these situations, and then they're basically enslaved.
That's right. So being poor is not a reason that people are trafficked.
It presents
it's a condition, right?
Conditions,
so whether it's a war-torn area or poverty as a result of bad economic situation, born into poverty, tornadoes, tsunamis, all of these things. You know, I'm a second-generation Eastern European American. My grandmother came over from Ukraine when she was 17. She could have been someone who was trafficked, which is part of the reason in my work globally as a public health nurse that I've become involved in this issue. Because I really do believe that all of us have come from some place, whether this generation or previous, for reasons that people leave their homes. They either send one parent or both parents, children are left behind, or the oldest child in the family goes. So we can talk about the difference between someone choosing to leave and then being introduced to someone who then exploits them brings them across a border, whether here it's the United States, across a state border or within their own state, or from another country into the United States, under the false premise that they're going to get a job, they'll be a au pair for a family, etc.
But, you know, travel, how do they get the passports and all the documents that are needed so that you can, in fact, travel across
Well, that's
borders?
a great question, Tony. All of us can apply for passports. People apply for passports.
But it's not easy anymore.
No, it's harder.
Right.
It's certainly not easy here,
Right.
and it's not easy to get a
But
visa.
are they being that above board about it, or are they simply going underground and often are not these types of documents?
Are you saying illegal documents?
Right.
Are they
Well, there's
legal
that.
documents, or-
There's illegal documents. People are being smuggled across borders. We know that in certain parts of the world, people are not brought to the airport given their passport and their visa and entering, although they may be doing that. You have to realize that because if you think about it being a $32 billion as one estimate, it could be higher, global economy, that you know, if only these people would divert their interests into doing good, the world would be in a different situation. So we have to also appreciate that there's corruption at borders, there's corruption within governments, there's corruption within law enforcement. That's just the truth. And so what we have are conditions that are really supporting the enslavement of people worldwide.
You know, Barbara, I was just thinking, what role does the United States play in all this? It sounds like there's a major role in terms of organized crime, or that they want to come to this country to begin with. So what's the role?
Well, in 2000, the United States government, in response to an increasing awareness of the trade in labor and sex, and that was under the Clinton administration, created what's called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act.
Yes.
And we can talk specifically about the act, exactly. But basically what it has done is it's created, along with the United Nations and countries around the world, it has created a tiered system where they look at whether a country, and this is every country in the world, has established legislation against human trafficking, whether they're enforcing it, and what kind of services they're creating for people within their own country or those who've been trafficked into their country who are found and then supported back either to their home country or to stay and get services there. The tiered system is three-tiered. The first tier is you're doing pretty good. The second tier, you're doing pretty good, you could do better. And the third tier, you're not doing well enough. And that's a very oversimplification for your viewers who are interested. They can find out more.
On that?
Well, this is only the second year the United States has actually included themselves in that report. Up until last year, and with our new president, President Obama, and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and the pressure by the advocacy community saying the U.S. needs to include itself. Well, so we're doing pretty good. I believe last year we were a tier 1. And this year, I'm not sure, the report actually is just coming out. So I think that what we can do is feel good that the United States took a lead on this. The United Nations, for those who want further information, ungift.org.
We're not what you would call a source country. We're a country that traffickers, you know, these people come to, basically. Right? We create the demand. We are both, but aren't we more? Well, aren't we the ones that we're a destination?
We're both.
Aren't we more the destination?
You know, I guess to that question, I guess adding to it, what's so interesting to me is it's like every other social ill. There's a demand.
Absolutely.
So like
What's
when you
fueling
talk about
it?
what can we do, obviously be aware, but how do we stem the demand? Because people won't go for that profit motive or the greed if the demand isn't there. If there aren't people to sell humans to, or to, you know, put them into forced labor. You know, so how do we as neighbors and citizens and vigilant community members?
Sweatshops down in Chinatown. I mean, we have sweatshops all over New York, right?
That's
here
right.
in the
I think the question of where the United States is in terms of exporting people into trafficking, whether it's through the trade that exists here in this country and goes externally, what I want to say is that the numbers are all guesstimates for the most part. So what we do have are numbers that suggest that anywhere from 15 to 20,000 people are trafficked into the United States through Newark Airport, JFK Airport. Some of them leave and go to Atlantic City, go to Las Vegas, and many of them stay here in New York City. In addition, we do know that there are somewhere up to 300,000 children in the United States who are considered victims of trafficking. And legislation in New York State has changed where in terms of the demand piece, we can probably a whole other show, we can talk about the decriminalization or the legalization of prostitution, but now it's established in New York State and other states that under the age of 18, someone in the position of who is selling sex can be considered a victim of trafficking. Well, I think what some of you have all shared, before we went on the air, are these increasing numbers of stories, whether it's about children who've been sold and under the pretense of it being an adoption, to young women who are hospitalized or have been brought into precincts by the police or found on the street. Are then, if the supportive services by law enforcement, which they are trying to do in terms of training our law enforcement to be more sensitive to this issue, they discover that in fact this is a child who has been on the streets since she's or he's 12. There are also young men who are in this situation, we can't forget them, and who have learned to only be able to survive in this way. So when I say that poverty is not a reason for trafficking,
right, because you were talking about the myths, and we only got to
what I want to say is that people who find themselves in these situations are very vulnerable people, and we all know that. Taking a risk to support your family, taking a risk to leave a dangerous home environment. There are children who are discarded for lots of terrible reasons. Or sold. So there are multiple layers of issues that what I want the viewer to understand is that it's not people aren't choosing to be in these situations, right? So we need to be empathic about that, and then think about how awful this information is. But I must say, because of people like you, Tony, and your hosts, that we're talking about it because we want to mobilize people to be able to think of what is it that I can do.